This week, the Albuquerque Police Oversight Commission upheld a finding that an officer used improper force. It was the first such finding in 4 years by the commission. Meanwhile, city councilors are proposing more money for training and the creation of a mental health task force. A new policy prevents officers from carrying their own weapons. That's new too. It's something the DOJ said contributes to an aggressive culture within APD. Another new policy forbids shooting at a moving vehicle, and Mayor Barra says more changes are coming, even before there is a formal agreement with the DOJ. Joining us to talk about this and other news of the week, we have Line regular attorney and social media consultant Sophie Martin with us. And back once again is another regular, oh, so glad she's back, Laura Sanchez-Rive of Sanchez Legal Solutions. Congratulations. Show the ring, show the ring. You're married now, there you go, right on. Someone who has been absent much too long from this table is with us again, Harry Van Buren, associate professor with the Anderson School of Management at UNM. And we welcome back former state Senator Mark Boitano. Sorry, Mark, my fault there. Harry, first things first, things are far from resolved at APD, certainly. We saw another protest at council last week on Thursday. But I'm interested in if you are seeing some cracks of forward progress here. Right. What's your sense of it?
My sense is that there's a lot of attention that's being given to structural solutions. So telling police officers that they have to carry standard issue guns strikes me as a step forward. But I was talking to my class about this. So I teach an undergraduate class in managerial ethics, and we spent a half class trying to fix the APD. And the basic, which was a pretty immodest target, and what we were trying to do was trying to figure out what was going on behind the department. And my sense is that a lot of these structural things, such as the lapel cams and the guns, really don't get at the cultural element. There really seems to be a mismatch between the department and the people who live in the community. So in some sense, the question becomes, how do you fix that? How do you fix the culture of the department so that the people in the department trust the community and vice versa?
What was the result in the class to that very question? I'm curious.
They essentially said it's going to be a very, very long haul because it's one thing to pass a policy or to have training. Now, don't get me wrong, all those things are important. But what we really need to do is to think in cultural terms, and that's a much longer term solution. We're talking 3 years, 5 years out. And so in some sense, the protesters are hoping for this immediate quick fix, and that's just not going to work.
Interesting. The IRO, Robin Hammer, who's come under some heat for some time now, and in the DOJ report, a little aligned, a little too close with the department. She dropped the hammer, on somebody, on an officer this week.
I didn't even think of that.
Interesting, no one, in the situation she ruled on, no one died, but a bullet did go into an elementary school building, which is sort of bad enough, as they say.
Yes, a shocking reminder.
Yeah.
I think that of the effects that we see from the protests, from the discussion, et cetera, this strikes me as the most immediate change, concrete change that we've seen. This move on the part of Ms. Hammer to, I mean, I don't know if she's going to express it this way, but my sense of it is that she's rethought how she manages her investigations, how she manages her view of APD, and I have to consider that a positive step. You know, we have a tendency to say, well, there are laws, there are regulations, there are rules, but there's also the interpretation of those things. And it feels to me that for the past 4 years, the interpretation has been somewhat lax in terms of how we look at APD. We need to be looking carefully at the results of those shootings. And there are internal mechanisms, but if they're broken, they're not working, then that's going to lead to that ongoing lack of trust that Harry was talking about.
Senator, it's interesting how the ruling also involved SWAT, which was, again, in the DOJ report, a big problem out there. It seemed like no one's really watchdogging this end of our business here. I'm wondering if you think this might be the beginning of something, first domino to go over about SWAT specifically and how we look at SWAT and how we accept it in our community.
Well, that's got to be a part of the debate. And, you know, Harry was talking about the culture, and I think, you know, one bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch, but I think sometimes there's a little bit too much private swagger in the department and not enough emphasis on public safety. And so, you know, there's a lot of pieces to this. I think weaponry does make a difference. And, you know, if we limit, I think we need to give officers choice, but perhaps limit the choices that they have. I think that's a big deal. Reporting accountability is a big deal. I mean, for me, 2 or 3 days after an incident, too long to wait. I mean, I remember from college, you know, accidents and so forth, you see them, and then 3 or 4 days later, your understanding of the facts are very, very vague. So I think, you know, there's a big puzzle that needs to be put together. I think we're moving in the right direction.
What we're not doing, however, is seeing anything on video from lapel cameras, apparently. And it looks like we have a long way to go on this, Laura, that you know, the culture of the idea, you must turn these things on. And it seems to me what the IRO is also saying is, look, someone's going to get dunked here for not turning on this camera. Someone's going to be next in line here, it seems to me. Would you agree with that? It just, something has to be, accountability is what I'm getting at here for this lapel camera.
Well, I think that was a huge part of the Department of Justice report. And an area that they highlighted about the systemic problems was that there was a lack of accountability and a lack of systems to ensure that kind of accountability. And that ties back into the public trust. I mean, they go hand in hand. There's not going to be public trust without some level of assurance of accountability in the system. And I think, you know, I agree completely that this has to be a long-term solution. Unfortunately, we live in an immediate sort of instant gratification kind of world where we want to see immediate change. And the only kind of immediate change that people seem to be satisfied with is a change in the people at the helm. So, you know, aside from somebody being removed altogether, I just don't see people being satisfied on that level. So it's a lot about managing, I think, the expectations of the community. I think they would be well served with being as transparent as they can be, holding, you know, as many stakeholder meetings as they can. Just regaining that public trust that they've eroded recently.
I'm glad you said that. You can't have too many of those. You just can't. City Council, some activity, Sophie, about getting serious about putting some money behind mental health issues.
I think that was a really interesting, an interesting initiative. Is it Dan Lewis who put that forward? The idea of doubling the money that the mayor has requested. I think, to be honest, I think that just saying ×2 and it's taken care of is a little flip. But looking at where the money would go, there's no question in my mind that these are areas that need funding, and probably more funding than the City Council is putting forward, but it is a step forward. And so it's interesting to see what appears to be bipartisan support firming up around Lewis's proposal. We'll see where that goes. But money is not the only issue, as we hear from our friends on both sides of the debate. And to Laura's point, there does appear to be a long-term problem with inconsistent management within APD. That you know, that's a process where you make it clear that the policies really matter, and then you demonstrate that you're going to follow them. And that is an issue that I think the APD really has not taken up appropriately.
Right. Harry, the mayor says he is, as I mentioned in the setup, he's got some other ideas coming that's going to kind of get ahead of the curve a little bit, which is nice, and everyone's, you know, I'm sure happy about that. What can he really do, though, at this point? Nothing specific I'm asking you to come up with, but is there really anything he can do at this point before the DOJ comes out with their stuff? That
I don't think there's really anything he can do before the DOJ can come in terms of specific programs. I think what he's got to do are the things that he's doing now, where he's talking about the issue, he's talking about the importance of management at APD, and I think he would be
but is he getting to the culture thing you mentioned?
He may not be getting to the culture thing, and I think it would be helpful for him to signal that, and for the folks at the department, particularly management, to signal that as well. So to go to Sophie's point, one of the things that APD's management has to understand is that there are two audiences. There's the general public, who's an audience for what the APD is doing, and there's also the rank and file officers. And so it's a really difficult trick to pull off in terms of satisfying both of those audiences, but there's really no way forward unless the management can do that. There's where I think Mayor Barry can be helpful.
Interesting. I like that take there. By the way, interesting that Senate Democrats put out yesterday. Anybody see the email? Michael Sanchez had a bill 18 years ago about regard. Senator, why don't you speak to that for a second? You're familiar with that, I'm sure, but
well, and
I was fascinated.
The mental health piece of the problem is huge, and there needs to be more training. We need to look at events, learn from them, and looking forward, figure out what we can do better. I'm really cautious. I'm concerned, though, when we talk about City Council and state legislative legislation, because you know what we don't want to do is we don't want to tell the union what to do in law in terms of training, in terms of education. Any kind of continuing education should be developed by the professionals, by the teachers, by appraisers, by the police union. So I'm kind of concerned about that.
Okay.
So it depends, yes, we need to do something on the mental health front, but I don't know if the city council should be telling the Police Officers Association or the legislature should be telling them specifically what needs to be done.
That's interesting. Coming up, our next candidate interview with Lawrence Real.